Okay, so I'm going to be analyzing Steve McRae's "Is Agnostic an Atheist? No" video. Now he responds, "Is there anything to analyze? Nothing besides a minor typo is incorrect in this video." I don't care about minor typos. I mean, if you wanted to be really pedantic, be like, "Oh, that's a formal fallacy," I guess you could, but I mean, it's just so unimportant that I never have done that yet. But maybe one day I will. Now, normally I'd play the video and stop it whenever there's logical fallacies, but I've saved myself the time of doing that because I've already watched the video. And Steve's right. There aren't logical fallacies. Kind of. So here's the kind of part. In the video, Steve mentions the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Immediately I thought, appeal to authority. But what's important to note about the appeal to authority is that it is only invalid if your entire argument is essentially saying that this is true because this authority said it's true. So is Steve's argument doing that? If not, then it doesn't have that logical fallacy. If it is, then it does. If you read up on the definitions of atheism according to Stanford's encyclopedia, you'll see a lot of similarity between that and Steve's argument, although he condenses the argument even shorter than is on this page, and I think he makes it far easier to understand than what's given here. But nonetheless, you could read this and come to the same conclusions that Steve did. So, because I've run out of things to show on the screen while I talk, I'm going to be playing Steve's video in the background of what I am talking about, even though it's not necessarily related to what I'm saying. Okay, so is agnostic an atheist? I actually agree. No, it's not. They're two different things, because otherwise putting the two together wouldn't really make sense. Agnostic atheist, agnostic theist, that combination wouldn't be coherent. Now, Steve is also correct on this particular thing where he's saying that this is what agnosticism is, again, according to this particular definition in this particular case. As I said, if you grant that, yes, that's the one that we should be using, or that's the one we must be using, then the argument flows from there. And the only point of contention would therefore be, does Steve say that his argument rests upon this thing being the ultimate authority source? Is he saying that everything that he says is true because it came from this particular source? If he does say that, either implicitly or outright, then I think that the fallacy would be granted at that point. Although, if it's implicit, I would put a question mark over it, because I wouldn't be completely sure that you could, in fact, assign that particular fallacy to his argumentation. Another point that you could have contention with is God itself, the word God. Well, what's that mean? And you might take what I would call a weak atheist position. Now, atheist is its own category of what that means, but according to definitions I've seen, it says that atheist essentially asserts that the word God is incoherent, and so if you even use the word God, you're automatically wrong because you don't know what it is, and it's a meaningless word, so you might as well not bother, and there you go. And there might be some truth to that. It is somewhat meaningless, but there is a agreed upon, at least within a large proportion of the population, of what God is, so you could go with that, but then you have, what, an appeal to popularity of what the word is? Kind of. And this is really where it all comes crumbling down. The fact of the matter is, what we're dealing with is natural language. Words evolve over time, and the way that people use those words evolves over time, and the way that people use that word also evolves over time. Now, Steve seems to make the argument in his video that this is the way that this has been for a long time. This is the way that philosophers understand it, and other, I suppose you could say high tier levels of people understand this word. But it's thanks to the so-called new atheists, Austin community of atheists, other big name atheist organizations and atheist speakers out there that have continually pushed forward the idea that the word atheist means I don't believe in God. It doesn't mean there is no God, because we don't want to make that claim. It just means we don't believe in God. Although we might indeed be saying that we don't believe that there is a God either, or that there is no God. In any case, there's been proposed weak atheist, strong atheist, and on top of agnostic atheist, and of course agnostic theist, and strong theist, and weak theist, and it all gets rather confusing. So I understand, I think, Steve's thrust. It's easier when we all agree what the word should be and how to use that word. The problem is getting everyone to agree that that's how we ought to use that word without invoking a fallacy, an appeal to authority. Look, this is this book. Use it. Why? Because this is the book to use. So, that's according to you. Well, all these other philosophers say so. So, that's an appeal to majority. Who cares? We don't have to listen to them. But it's official! Yeah, whatever. We don't care. What if another college releases a different encyclopedia of philosophy that has a different definition? Then what? Well, but it's Stanford. Well, okay, so it's Harvard. So what? Who has more credibility, and then what? Well, it's a problem, isn't it? Because how do you argue for what a word must be versus what a word is being used as? And I honestly don't know that you can do that without a potential fallacy or without an actual fallacy of either an appeal to majority and or appeal to popularity, appeal to authority of some sort. Now, those things may not be invalid. They're only invalid depending on how you frame the argument at hand. So the meta argument that Steve is making is what needs to be unraveled here. It's what needs to be uncovered. And based solely on what he says in this particular video, I'm going to examine those bits to see whether or not he potentially makes this fallacy or explicitly makes the fallacy.
Where agnostic is best explained by the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
So the word best suggests a scale almost. Like, it's better than this one. The other philosophy books aren't as good. This is the best one. Well, what's the measurement system? How do we decide what the best is? How does that work? And so on and so forth. Or, and I think that this is important, we should try to steelman this argument and think, well, maybe he means best as in it's very well explained. Yeah, it is well explained. But the best explanation, it is not in the terms that it's better than every other explanation out there. Because if you were going to say that, then indeed you are in fact committing the appeal to authority, unless you can demonstrate that it is in fact the best out there, and that in and of itself would require some, I don't know, chart or mathematical formula or something really bizarre to show that, this one's better than this philosophy definition, or this one, or it's just, a standard old dictionary's definition. It's like, oh, that's not the philosophy definition, so it doesn't count. And then you've got special pleading tossed in there, So you're going to have to be very careful. And I think that Steve is very careful. So I don't think he means best in the way that normally I would think of best, and that you might think of best. And I want to think the best out of Steve's argument. So best, oh bleep, I'm saying best too many times. Anyway, so I don't think that it is a fallacy yet, but you could say it might be based on that word best.
The atheist, philosophical atheism, affirms the negation that P is false. That is not the case that at least one God exists.
This is a potential for special pleading or equivocation, or both. Is there a distinction between philosophical atheism versus non-philosophical atheism? In fact, is there a thing that would be called non-philosophical atheism? If there is, and we're treating philosophical atheism differently for special reasons that we're not giving to non-philosophical atheism, then special pleading would be warranted. On the other hand, if we're saying no, atheism always means philosophical. There is no such thing as non-philosophical atheism. Don't be ridiculous. Then you have a potential for equivocation. By saying philosophical atheism is the same as saying atheism. So you could then change it somewhere and say, well, when I say atheism by itself, it means this, but when I say philosophical atheism, it means that. Now, Steve doesn't do that here, but one could do it because the two could be separated in that way, when in fact they should never be separated in that way. So when you read the word atheist, you should always assume that the word in front of it is philosophical, if indeed that's the only version of atheism that's possible. You could debate about that in and of itself, and I'm not going to. I'm just pointing out the potential problems here. So is it actually a problem? Maybe, but only if you can show that it's either of these problems. So you would then have to demonstrate that there is a philosophical versus non-philosophical atheism, and I have no idea how you would do that. And to be able to show that it was equivocation, you'd have to show that Steve somehow used atheism and philosophical atheism in two different ways in the same video. And I don't think that he did that. In every case that he says atheism, you could put the word philosophical in front of it, and it would still be the same argument. So I can get rid of that plus other one with the question mark thing, because it's definitely not that. But it could be special pleading, maybe, depending on things, but I can't verify those things. So I'm going to have to remove that one then. So we're back to 1. Yeah!
This means that the agnostic suspends judgment on the proposition of God existing. And again, this is exactly what is in line with the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy when it says, quote,
it really doesn't matter that the argument happens to line up with what the encyclopedia of anything says, or any definition given, or any dictionary. It just doesn't matter. The argument stands or falls on its own merits. It's valid and sound on its own, or it's not, period. Now, it does line up, and I guess that would be extra bonus points if you were doing an essay or something like that, but it's just not really relevant for the argument in and of itself. But it does again raise the question of, isn't this whole thing based upon that the idea itself of what this word is coming from the source that you cited? The Standard Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines it in this way. And that's the definition I'm using. Therefore, the Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines it that way. Okay. Wait, is that a circular argument? Uh-oh. That's a problem. But it's not, because he's not saying that it's true because it came from there, but it's awfully close, so now are we at 2 potential fallacies? Depending on how you look at it, you might indeed be at 2 fallacies. But I really don't think that you could say that it's a circular argument, because it doesn't sound circular. But it could be. But can you say it's an appeal to authority? Well, it doesn't really sound like an appeal to authority, but it's awfully close. So it could be, but I'm not willing to say that it is just yet. But still, the number is 2 question mark, because it might be both of these.
as illustrated by Dr. Malpass in his Use of Reason blog.
Yes, as illustrated by Einstein in this book, or by whoever in whatever. That's not what's relevant. It's not who said it or where they said it. It's either true on its own or it's not. So we don't have to reference who said what where, although it's great to have references. Don't get me wrong. I love references. But here, the argument still must stand or fail on its own merits. The fact that somebody else has something to say that relates to your argument doesn't really matter. And if Steve is saying that because this doctor says this, that therefore it's true, or that we should give it more credibility because it's from a doctor, I'm guessing of philosophy, well, then either of those cases would definitely be an appeal to authority. But that's not what Steve is saying. He's just saying, here's this doctor, and this is this thing that he says about this, and here's how he views this argument. And that happens to line up with Steve's argument. So it's not that fallacy, but it might be.
While Mr. Raw and groups like American Atheist or Atheist Community of Austin can use any stipulative uses of words they wish, they simply cannot change how these words are used in philosophy or most commonly understood in the academic literature.
But why not? Why couldn't they change it? Aaron Raw, Austin Community, nobody ever can change it? No individual or group can ever change what's in this encyclopedia? Why not? Is there a rule that says that all words in this encyclopedia are sacred and unchangeable? Or is it certain words are never to be changed, but other words can be changed? Who decides what goes in there in the first place? Certainly somebody has to at some level, so why couldn't they potentially become the person that's in charge of deciding what's in there or not and just change it? If it's impossible to change because of rules or policy, couldn't that rule or policy be changed? Or is there something that underpins that this is the way it will be forever and all time, and that is encoded in some way, shape, or form in such a way that nobody ever could change it no matter what you did to the system? That might be the case. But whatever the case might be, if they're unable to change it because of rules or policies, or that they would have to do some insurmountable deed to do it, but then they could still do it. If they can do it at all, then it's not true. But if nobody can do it ever, no matter what degree they had, no matter how much money or influence or power or whatever they had, then that statement stands. But we don't have an argument for it, which would be a formal fallacy, a failure to give an argument. Well, who cares? It's just a formal fallacy. Unfortunately, it comes along, in this case, with an informal fallacy, a bald assertion. Something asserted without anything to back it up. So it might very well be the case that any individual and or group could, in fact, change what the encyclopedia says. And if and when that happened, this argument could not stand. Why? Because the argument depends on this particular definition being correct. And the argument is saying that that definition is correct. If and when that ever changes, the argument would gain additional fallacies. But for now, it has one. Not bad, but could be better. And it has possible fallacies. My hope is that when and if Steve does respond to this, he won't eat me, but instead respond to the points that I've raised and counter the fallacies by showing that he didn't do what I said that he might have done, and instead this is how I should view it, and sort that all out. Because we can disagree with each other. We're civilized human beings. See, it's not going to be the case that I'm going to block Steve, or he's going to block me, or call each other names. No, because we're better than that. We're not going to have a meltdown and be like, oh, I'm something, I need help on Twitter, oh, he's an asshole forever and I'll tell him. No, we're not going to do that. You can disagree with people. It's okay. And you can do so within logic. Logic's a beautiful, wonderful, fantastic system. And if we're all doing it correctly, we should arrive at similar conclusions. But we might mess up. Either one of us could potentially be wrong here. And it's up to the system of logic to sort that out, ideally. And one of us will have a valid and sound argument, the other one won't, or Steve will fix his current argument. I think that he will fix the definite fallacies at the end. The potential appeal to authority, I don't know what he'll do with that, but I look forward to his response, which I think he will give. And he won't eat me when doing so. He'll do it politely, just as I did here, perhaps with a little bit of humor sprinkled in, as I tried to do here. Whether or not that came through, I don't know. But it's not like, a Twitter war and oh, you called me out, I have to crush you now, or you called me out, I have to eat you and get all my followers, No, come on, we can do better than that. We must do better than that. But some don't do better than that. But you know what? I'm going to make this promise to Steve. Any money that I make from this video will go to him. Which, no, well, I mean, that's not really fair. I did a lot of work. Okay, half of the money that I make from this video will go to Steve. Hold on. How much do I make from this video? 0. Oh. Okay. Simple enough. Divide by 0.